Hello gamers, today's video is quite an interesting one. Have you ever been enjoying a TV show or movie and ever wondered if that media was lucky enough to get its very own video game made about it? Well, I do that quite a lot, if you can't tell by previous videos on this channel, which explains a lot of the PS2 games I've also been talking about recently, from like The Simpsons Hit and Run to Star Wars Revenge of the Sith and more. I even have more planned in the future, including this video on the anime, and I assume it's popular because it's the only anime I've ever watched. But hey, so before I talk about the game Initial D Special Stage, I want to just briefly mention how I decided to start watching Initial D. Well, like any car guy, I had at least heard of it before from word of mouth and from like talking to people in Assetto Corsa lobbies before they cursed me out for not being a massive drifting fan. I'm much more a fan of, you know, that sort of like grip formula stock car, or maybe not stock car, but GTE sort of racing, GT3, stuff like that. But then there was a series of events that made me decide to give it a shot. And that was, well, I'd gotten a bit of a stomach bug and the doctor said that I needed to take a week off work. And well, let's just say, I wasn't arguing with him. However, I was looking down the barrel of rewatching a TV show that I've seen for like the 4th time, when for some reason I remembered someone talking about Initial D, so I watched an English dub of the first episode of Stage 1 on YouTube, and I can't really say what I liked about it, because I don't know exactly what that is, but I liked it a lot. So much so that I pulled out my wallet and picked myself up a Crunchyroll subscription and watched a very large amount of the show. I don't remember where I got up to. It was probably halfway through the Project D saga, but unfortunately I was feeling better and that means I had to return to work once again, and I didn't really have any spare time to watch more of the show. So it wasn't until a couple of months after all of that I pulled up Crunchyroll again to finally get back to enjoying one of my quickly becoming favourite shows. And well, it had been removed / made unavailable on the service, and I looked everywhere to watch it, but I couldn't find it anywhere, like not even spending money to watch a single episode. So fortunately I looked up to start watching the show at just the right time to get hooked on it, but I wasn't fortunate enough to be able to finish the show. And maybe I won't be able to for a long time, so now I look for different mediums to enjoy Initial D that don't quite require me learning Japanese for a single anime or manga. And of course the first medium I looked at, and the only one I ever really look at, was of course TikTok fan edits. But after watching most of them, I then made my way over to video games. So is there an Initial D video game? Yes, there's a whole series of games named Initial D Stage. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 AAA, 7 AAAX and 8 Affinity. I don't know why they started adding letters and words to the titles, but they are all made by Sega for arcade machines. And then there are a couple others still made by Sega but for other platforms. There was Initial D Street Stage, made for the best console ever, the PSP. Which, counting it's a PSP game, it runs kind of okay for a PSP game. There was also Extreme Stage, made for the PS3. And finally there was the game released for the PlayStation 2, and the one I decided on playing, that being Initial D Special Stage. Now, why did I pick the PS2 game over the PS3 one? Well, to be put simply, because I already had a PS2 emulator and I don't have one for the PS3, so that's basically it. But now there is one major downside to the game, well, at least a downside for me. That is that the game is still very much in Japanese, and as I mentioned before, I don't know Japanese. Luckily, there was a version of the game that had been translated with a English dub mod. Now, unless I set something up wrong with this mod, this doesn't change any of the cutscenes or audio, but allows me to read all the menus and navigate the game. And the story didn't need to be in English for me to understand it, for me to understand what was happening, as this game took place during stages of the show that I had watched before, so I could sort of like interpolate, oh, that's this character talking to this character. I know what's going on, kind of. So now it's time to talk about the game itself, and I want to start off by talking about the graphics. And for a game that came out way back in 2003, that was like 2 decades ago, it looks pretty good. The cutscenes have the bonus of being in an anime style, which doesn't age as rough as like games that are trying to capture realistic graphics from 2003. Mainly thinking of like, I guess, the Tomb Raiders. And then when you are behind the wheel of the 86 or any other car in the game, they look pretty good. Like if you told me this was Forza Horizons 1 on low graphics on a potato computer, I would probably believe you. The cars look really good, however with the amazing graphics comes some so less than great controls. Since the game is based on arcade games, it has pretty simple controls with just an accelerator, brake, headlights, change camera and shift up and down buttons. And I was playing on automatic, so there wasn't even the shift up and down buttons. Which means it's easy enough to get a hand on, apart from me using the triggers to brake and accelerate, even though that's not the controls. That's just another case of the modern controller bias bringing me down. The problem mainly came up in-game, as it can be hard to tell if you are drifting into a corner or just turning, especially using the bumper cam, which I preferred over the third-person cam, as there is no handbrake and you can't easily flick the back end out. It probably also didn't help that I was once again playing from the bumper cam, but in my defense, it's hard to see around the car. Not because the game is blocky, but because the Toyota AE86 is a blocky car for the most part. But I quickly got a hand over the controls in terms of the drifting over time. But the only other issue I had with the controls was whenever you get close to the opponents to overtake them, you could get stuck to that car a bit. Now this is of course something that all iRacing fans are aware of, the magics of netcode and sticky cars. And sometimes it just seems like they can phase through your car, however. But that's just probably like my blind spots. You know, go check your blind spots. But sticky cars are never more clear than during the first stage of the race against, I'm going to apologize for me butchering this name, but Watero, as you are not allowed to pass him as a part of the story. But if you catch him, it becomes very sticky and ends up putting you into a wall, or in my case it would even glitch out my car's gears and bounce between 4th and 5th gear right after another constantly, even with me playing automatic mode instead of manual. But hey, maybe playing in manual mode would fix my sticky gear problems. As I kind of mentioned before, this game's story closely follows that of the anime. And by closely, I mean note for note, which normally, if my video game other media tie-in is just a carbon copy of the original media, I wouldn't be majorly impressed. But as I have also mentioned that the TV series has been incredibly hard to find a copy of to watch, I'm kind of okay with it being a carbon copy, as I kind of get to experience the story again. But realistically, this story has absolutely nothing to add at all, which is fine. The game is pretty much basically just fan service, which as a fan, I'm okay with. However, one downside is that I can just imagine how you could make a pretty good story out of this. Like, you could live in a different prefect and grow up moving up the ranks of your local mountain pass and then go off looking to beat the others and finding out about the 8-6. But at the same time, the game would probably be only Japanese, and I also have no idea about the audience that Initial D has. I guess there is a change, and if that audience has enough money to justify a large standalone game with its own story, especially, you know, back in 2003 and stuff. But anyways, this has been a quick look at Initial D, the PS2 game that I played because of how much I was craving Initial D content. I have even started to watch the English dubs on YouTube, which I'm not the biggest fan of watching like professional media on YouTube. If I can pay for it, I'd morally feel better about it. Even though I'm sure the original creators get barely any royalties from streaming content anyway. But anyways, that's it. I'm out. I'm gonna go watch more of the first stage.